Hello and welcome to a new podcast from WeThe15, the biggest ever human rights movement aiming to end discrimination of persons with disabilities, who make up 15% of the world's population. WeThe15, Access All Areas, is made by the same team behind A Winning Mindset Lessons from the Paralympics, which was the award-winning official podcast of the International Paralympic Committee. My name is Andy Stevenson, I'm a sports broadcaster, and I happen to have a disability myself. Join me in this new series as we take a look at society and investigate how attitudes can be changed to create more opportunities for persons with disabilities, as well as improving representation and amplifying a range of diverse voices. This week's WeThe15 podcast is about politics and government, a subject that I am personally really interested in, and I'm joined by two former Paralympic swimmers turned politicians. Carla Qualtrough was a 3-time bronze medalist in vision-impaired swimming across the Seoul and Barcelona Games, and she's the first Paralympian to be elected to Canada's House of Commons. And David Lega, also a Paralympic swimmer in his time, he set 14 world records during his career, and he has been a Swedish member of the European Parliament. I've been sat here thinking about why swimmers might make successful politicians, and all I could come up with was something about navigating choppy waters, perhaps. But do you both think, maybe starting with Carla, do you think there are attributes from your swimming days that have helped in your political careers?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, all the lessons that everybody would say you learn from sport around discipline and focus and doing, putting in the hard work. But swimming specifically, in my political campaigns, I've used the tagline, you got to do the laps. Like whatever that is and whatever you're trying to achieve, you can't cut corners and you can't not do the laps. So for us in politics, it's knocking on doors, it's getting out and talking to people. But, I tell my teams regularly, you just got to do the laps. And sometimes it's not fun and it's certainly not sexy, but it will get you the results you want if you work hard enough.
And David, what about you? Have there been things from your swimming career that you've taken into politics?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree completely with what Carla just said. I mean, as a politician, when you learn as a swimmer, when you hit a wall, you just turn and continue swimming the other way instead. I think it's the same. But also to add something is that as a swimmer, I think you understand that it takes time sometimes to get results. You still have to continue and do all those sessions, all that work. It takes 4 years in Sweden between an election and 4 years between a Paralympics. So it takes time and you're used to that.
Carla, I know when we look back at your career and your life, I know when we go back to your school days, your parents fought very hard to get you into what we would call a mainstream school, I think. And how significant was that when you look back?
Oh, game-changing, I would say. I mean, my parents, I was very lucky to have supportive parents who advocated for my right to be included, and they taught me how to do the same. They kind of sparked in me an interest in insisting that my needs be addressed and that I be included, and also made me very aware of the fact that, systems and policies and programs were not made or built with my needs in mind, and I would always have to fight to be included, and people would always make assumptions about what I could and couldn't do based on the fact that I couldn't see very well.
David, I know you've been very vocal about the fact that you work for all people. You are not just representing or working for disabled people, and that's a similar thing, isn't it? That's a similar feeling to making sure that you are going to a mainstream school and you're integrated into society.
Absolutely. It feels like we grew up exactly the same way when I listen to you. But also I think that I can actually also do more of a difference and helping more, even with disability issues, if I also broaden the perspective and try to work for all. For example, I am the chair of the Children Intergroup within the European Parliament, and that's children's rights for all children. Instead of only focusing and becoming a co-chair of the Disability Rights Intergroup, we can try to integrate those children with disabilities in the regular group instead. So, and that's one way to actually help both and do more of a difference in the end.
One of the things I'm quite passionate about is when people are working on accessibility for disabled people or specialist equipment or just policies that are intended to help disabled people, lots of other people benefit from those things too. There are always lots of positive spin-offs. I mean, my wife and I have got a 7-month-old son, and we've had a kind of eye-opening experience in terms of wheelchair accessibility by pushing a pushchair around, So it occurred to me that, extra ramps and accessible buildings and, cafes with space and everything like that, these things benefit everyone, don't they? Not just disabled people.
Well, that's the difference really between inclusion and accommodation, right? If you start from a position of including, like if you design your systems inclusively, everyone benefits. And then you're not, retrofitting or acknowledging that something doesn't work for a certain group and having to fix that. But if you just start from a perspective of inclusion, that's what you get.
And David, do you feel the same way?
Absolutely. But also I think that for me, it has always been easier. I mean, sometimes we all know that we need to take the back entrance, for example, to come up on stage, not doing the steps. And I have never worried about that. I think for me, it has always been the most important to actually come up on stage and deliver my speech. And you tend to realize that after you've done that a few times, then they will adapt and build everything also because they see the need for it. So for me, I've never really worried about that in the end, as long as I could come in and could enter and do what I was supposed to do. If it's a grocery store, a restaurant, I mean, we know that as politicians, right? All Hollywood movies, all exciting conversations are held in the garage. So we need to do that.
I take a slightly different perspective. I actually think it's really important to challenge. There's a dignity to it, but I completely agree with David. I'm very impatient and very stubborn about the precious limited time we have as politicians to make the change, that like the big change we want to make. I'm very aware that, this I serve at the pleasure. I can sleep in 4 years. I just have this real sense of urgency to everything I do because of kind of, if the system change we want takes a decade, but I only have 2 years or 4 years in the job, how do we figure that out? And people don't see what they don't see. So I'm a bit more stubborn in insisting as a matter of principle on those kinds of things. But I think we do have to understand change takes time.
And that naturally I agree with as well. Just that I wouldn't boycott a stage if I had to go in from the back.
100%.
That's my point.
100%. Yeah.
Right then, I'm going to hit you with some controversy here early on. I'm not going to give you an easy ride in this podcast, folks. I'm sat here in London in the UK, and I would say that the perception disabled people have of our politicians is a very negative one at the moment. I think that British disabled people often talk about politicians in terms of what they're taking away from us. They talk in terms of cruelty, a lack of understanding. Is that something you're familiar with in both Canada and Sweden, or is there a more positive relationship in your countries?
I think from a European perspective, because I haven't served in the Swedish Parliament, only in the European, that difference that is very different depending on which country you're from, because there's so much variation in all 27 member states within the European Union. But also I think you don't understand our lives is something that, as a politician, I would hear from people with disabilities, but also from entrepreneurs, from nurses, from librarians, from everyone you meet. You also hear that. And I think naturally I can't understand everyone's lives, but give me a chance and talk to me and let's try to figure something out together is always a better approach. We have an amazing system in Sweden with personal assistants, for example, that regardless how much help you need, you can employ your own personal assistants and live independently. But as all things, when things are tightened up, when the economy hits everything, people worry. And right now, many are worried, including myself. It is problematic, but also the foundation is good.
And Carla, what's the situation in Canada, would you say?
Well, first of all, I would say rightly so. Because I wouldn't say any government has a great track record of actually prioritizing the needs and interests and perspectives of people or citizens with disabilities. So I think that's not unfounded as a perspective within the UK. And I would say that perspective exists in Canada as well. The challenge at some levels has been lack of disability representation at these tables, in these parliaments and government amongst our elected officials, but also even within those circles and that I've now been kind of existing in, disability rights issues are minority issues and politics can be majoritarian. So, 23% of Canadians identify as having a disability. That's that's 1 in every 4 people. But if you think of kind of the way politicians think it's very hard to change these ships. It's very hard to come in and champion a minority interest in a world where majoritarianism rules. Having been the first person with a disability to be in cabinet, to be responsible for persons with disabilities, I think there's been a renewed hope in Canada in the past 6 to 8 years. The things we've done are giving people hope, but again, it takes so much time that I think people will look back 10 years from now and say, wow, we made a difference, but it's not being felt right now. So I'd say rightly so. We haven't done right by people with disabilities in the world yet, but we're working on it.
Maybe we need to rename this podcast in Canada. It's WeThe15 for release in Canada then. But I mean, you touched there upon a key issue I wanted to talk to you both about, which is why don't we see more disabled politicians, just, globally at any kind of level, national government, councils, UN, world leaders. Why don't we see more disabled people in those roles? And I guess the $64,000 question is, what can be done to increase the number of disabled people we see in politics?
Well, here in Canada, there's significant systemic barriers to feeling welcomed, whether it's how candidates are nominated or how parties recruit, how politicians live. I live in Vancouver. I go back and forth to Ottawa, 5-hour flight, 3-hour time difference every week. There's so many barriers. And then there's just the reality that the poverty, the lived experience of someone with a disability in Canada is not one where you aspire to politics just because you're too busy surviving. You're just so focused on the day-to-day. Families are struggling. And there's nobody who looks like us in politics. There's nobody that, historically I can look at and go, wow, that prime minister is blind. I too, as a blind woman, could be a prime minister, but we don't have that yet,
I think it's starting to change a bit. I mean, in Sweden, I was born in 1973. I was the first generation, I think, who started naturally going to regular schools, going to regular universities, having the education and having the backgrounds. I think just as I think we both were in a way when it comes to being role models in the Paralympic world, it needs to take a few to get everything started. So what we need to make sure, I speak a lot about that when I speak to the disability community in Sweden, that absolutely be active in the disability rights organizations and the communities, but try to also be active in the political parties. Try to go there as well, because we have so many extremely talented and good people with disabilities in our disability rights organizations. They just haven't sort of the possibility to move over to the normal world. Please take this the right way, but be there and make the differences there instead. That's why, I mean, in Parliament, I chose to serve in the Foreign Affairs Committee, because there I meet people who I wouldn't meet otherwise, and I can affect and change the minds of more people and other people instead of us only preaching to the choir, as we usually tend up. Speak in the room where everyone agrees.
You're completely right. Some of the most impactful work I've done in cabinet has been when I was Minister of Employment, when I was Minister of Procurement, when I could be in these other broader portfolios, be very kind of, single-minded sometimes in my case around removing barriers for people with disabilities, but having access to the Government of Canada procurement strategy and looking from a disability perspective, what barriers do we put in place to not use suppliers that led by people with disabilities, or make sure our employment programs for young people. So there's just an opportunity if you think bigger, to David's point.
Yeah. I mean, David, like you mentioned it there, I think one of the great ironies is that disabled people, I mean, I never like to generalize in this way, but disabled people will generally have a lot of the qualities you would want in a politician, and their life experience will have often involved fighting for things, making arguments for things, negotiating for things. That is the irony, isn't it? And it's so sad that it doesn't then sort of bleed through to seeing lots of disabled people. Yeah. You might have seen this story, but something quite interesting happened in the UK earlier this year. There was a Conservative MP, Craig McKinley. He came back working at Parliament after he had sepsis, and he actually had his hands and feet amputated. It was a remarkable thing to see. He was in the press a lot, naturally, and it made me think that although he didn't stand for re-election, he'll still, I'm sure, come under quite a lot of pressure to suddenly speak on behalf of disabled people everywhere, suddenly focus on disability issues, which maybe he had very little to do with before his illness. And that's actually quite an interesting thing, isn't it?
Well, first of all, I've read his story, which is fascinating, and you're absolutely right how he'll have to kind of pivot and kind of unapologetically decide where he wants to continue to have influence. And that's okay. He gets to make that choice. But his perspective, by virtue of now living as a person with disability, will naturally expand. And so whatever he chooses, to David's point earlier, whatever he chooses to do will now be informed by a disability perspective. And that will obviously help any kind of disability rights agenda, whatever he chooses to do. I hope people are kind. I hope people are kind.
Well, I'm thinking also, I mean, all of us, not only us in this podcast right now, have so many different identities, so many parts of ourselves. Yes, I am disabled and I will most likely always have my disability. But I mean, I was an athlete. We were both athletes, both parents, politicians. I mean, sometimes people expect us to do everything and only be interested in disability rights issues because we have a disability. And naturally, that's important to me, but so many other things are as well. The ongoing war in Russia, Ukraine, it's horrible. I mean, there are so many things that you care about, not only disability rights issues. And I think that's also the next step. That when things are working, when I have my assistance, when I have my healthcare, when I have my wheelchairs, when everything around me is working, I can become more than just my disability. My identity can develop and evolve and become something else. But if those things are failing, naturally my focus will be on that first. So I think that's what we as politicians also need to do, make sure that these things are working to allow people to become something else if they want to.
And it can't just be on us, right? It can't just be on those of us who identify as having a disability. One of my most excited moments when I'm in the House of Commons is when a disability question is asked and a different cabinet minister stands up and answers it, right? I'm like, that is fantastic. Because you know what? Accessible airline travel, that's actually a transportation issue. And so when the Minister of Transport stands up and informedly answers the question on accept like that, then I'm like, that's the change. That's what David's talking about. That isn't on me. Agree. Just because they can just say, okay, Carla's got this. Carla's going to figure out every issue for everyone with a disability in the country. But, it actually makes me kind of like, you can see it. Like, it makes me very excited when a colleague takes on a disability issue as their own. And my job, of course, is to make sure they do it well. But the fact that he stood up or that they stand up it's change, right? It's progress. Wouldn't have happened 8 years ago in Canada, ever. It would have always been this minister, whatever the issue is.
I'm laughing at that. That's quite amusing. I've got this image in my head now of the question is asked, everybody turns to look at you, and then somebody else over here answers the question, and you're quietly celebrating in the corner. I really like that.
Yeah.
Now, I mean this next question in a positive sense. I don't mean to be critical at all, but was the fact you were both Paralympians, successful Paralympians, did that help you get into politics? Or to put it another way, would it have been more difficult to get where you both are now if you hadn't been Paralympians?
Yes, for me, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think from two regards, I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for sport. Like I found Paralympics at a really kind of pivotal moment in my personal journey where I was really struggling to find something to identify with where I felt included and welcomed. And that's when I found Paralympic sport and became completely fascinated with the idea that we could build systems that were inclusive by design. But then kind of going back to your other question, just fundamentally, excellence is a transferable skill, right? When you've learned in your life to be good at something, you can transfer that knowledge and be good at other things. And you've kind of figured out the work that it takes to do something. And I think what it says to voters, in my case, and what it says to people about my work ethic, my drive, my focus, my commitment to helping people, just like the fact that I was a human rights lawyer, you kind of put those two together and it just adds to the story, I guess.
And David, you felt the same?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, when I started my career as a politician later in life after doing other things, people knew my background as a Paralympian and as a swimmer, and they knew of me. So they just what you said, that Carla, that people knew that they could count on us doing absolute best and never give up and try to continue in that field too, to try to improve their lives as well. It was very different from me being a politician in Sweden, where people always thought that you were the celebrity athlete going into politics in the beginning.
Yeah.
And when I came into the European Parliament, people had no clue. My colleagues there were members who thought that I was the disabled mascot instead. So I had to fight that for the first time, because trying to show that I actually know what I'm doing, that's why I'm here. And that took a few months to get people's understanding and respect for being a good politician and not only the guy in the wheelchair. So that was all new compared to having been rather public for 30 years before that.
We've been talking about some great stuff here and some sort of heavy issues. And because of that, I've sort of skipped ahead a couple of sections here. I probably need to rewind and ask you both specifically how you both got into politics, actually, which I should have asked at the start, but we got into some interesting topics. So, David, what was it for you that kind of, flicked the switch, as it were, to go from, Paralympian, who I'm sure was, campaigning and thinking about lots of topics, into becoming an actual full-time politician?
Well, for me, I think for the first 25 years of my life, 28 years maybe, everything was so focused on me becoming stronger, faster, better. You had my family, you had the teachers, you had the swim coaches, everyone around tried to push me to become better. And after that, I felt also that it was my responsibility to give back, to make sure that other people will have the same possibilities as I had. So I think many politicians start out because of something negative happened to them. For me, it was the other way around. It was excellent that I wanted more to have the chance. So when the party reached out and asked if I could run for them, I was very hesitant at the beginning, because I was a public speaker, entrepreneur, and going from public speaking, where everyone wants to understand you, to moving into politics, where at least 50% wants to misinterpret you, was a hard move, but I haven't regretted it one day.
And for me, it was slightly different. I mean, I had been a human rights lawyer for a number of years and had become increasingly frustrated by, we've got a really robust human rights system in Canada, but it's very reactive. So you have to wait until somebody is discriminated against before this whole system kicks in. And then you say you shouldn't have been denied that job because you're Black. You shouldn't have been denied that housing because you have a disability. And so I actually initially kind of dipped my toe into politics by running for a local school board here. And that put me on the radar of the National Liberal Party here in Canada. And in fact, was recruited quite actively by Justin Trudeau, who wasn't the prime minister at the time. And initially I said no. My youngest son was only 2 at the time. And it was really the hook of, if you run for us and if you're successful, we can help you advance disability rights from the inside of government. Like, it was really, and I'm like, well, I could get behind that. And then he made good on his promise and immediately appointed me to cabinet, and has given me quite a lot of leeway on the policymaking and lawmaking and programming side to really horizontally, I would say, infiltrate. That's what it feels like most of the time. Government here in Canada. So it was really not on my radar, politics at all. It wasn't the plan until I was actively recruited.
You've both touched on this already, but I just want to kind of drill down into it a bit more. And in my own career as a sports reporter, I've covered the Paralympics for several years. I'm going to Paris again this summer. But actually, for me, it's almost more important the work I do in non-disabled sport, whether that be football, golf, tennis, whatever it is. Those things that I'm doing that don't have anything to do with disability are almost more important to me, just to show that I am a sports reporter who happens to be disabled, not just a disabled sports reporter, if I can put it that way. Have you both found there have been policies or perhaps just areas of interest that you have kind of deliberately focused on because they had nothing to do with disability, and in that way they prevent you from becoming pigeonholed?
Not actively like that. I think I have focused on many different things because I'm interested in them. I'm not only interested in disability rights issues. So it hasn't been to make sure that it's something else, but we have so many different interests. For me, it was that.
Just to say on that though, David, that it's not that you've deliberately targeted topics that don't have anything to do with disability, but if your role as a politician was only about disabled issues, presumably there would be a great deal of frustration there for you.
Absolutely. And I don't think I would have been a good politician if I only focused on one thing, regardless of what that thing was. I'm also a member on the subcommittee on human rights within the European Parliament. So that's general. And I think that's how we need to look at things.
Yeah, I've been more singularly focused, I will say. For me, my two passions in life are sport and persons with disabilities and disability rights. And so for me, kind of leaving competition and getting involved in the Paralympic movement, as president of the Canadian Paralympic Committee, as vice president of the Americas Paralympic Committee, just being involved with the IPC on their legal committee for a number of years. For me, kind of taking the human rights lens and layering it with this, using sport as a tool to advance broader kind of human rights issues has very interested me. But I have found there is so much work to be done in the disability space that's where I'm comfortable and that's where I enjoy spending my time. But there is nothing more impactful, to David's point, of going, of kind of spreading that influence beyond a disability focus only, because you just can't do it. It just can't be done. One of the things that what you all have been talking about made me think of is how much more, I say open, and maybe I'd even say honest, I've had to be about my disability since coming into politics. I think like many of us, I went through an evolution throughout my life of how I identified and how I identified in my relationship with my own disability. And I would say there was a time, probably in my teens, when if somebody said to me, I can't tell that you're legally blind. Wow, couldn't even tell that you can't see very well. I would have considered that quite the triumph that they had looked at me first and seen my disability, and that I had kind of tricked them or fooled them. And it's only kind of as I've grown older and become more disability confident myself that I see it as a part of who I am. Just the fact that I can't see has very much informed the way I look at the world and the way I parent, the way I govern, the way I lead. But I've had to be very deliberate with expressing my needs as a person with a disability unapologetically, and kind of separating what I can do from how I have to do it because I can't see very well. And that's been a journey.
I was going to ask you, actually, both of you, what actually is your experience day to day, practically speaking, of being a politician with the different disabilities you have? It is, you must encounter accessibility issues and problems like that yourselves. So, David, what's it like for you? It's arthrogryposis that you were born with, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Very unusual.
Perhaps for people listening who might not be familiar with that, maybe just give us a sense of what that involves and how it affects you day to day.
It affects people very differently. For me, it has made my arms are completely paralyzed, and I have about 30% movement in my legs in total. And I can't stretch my knees. So I pedal in a special invented wheelchair that I invented, tricycle with a small front wheel pedals, and I use my mouth to write, my toes to write on keyboards, and my mouth and feet for everything. And if that affected me, it's hard. Maybe I don't have anything to compare with. This is me. And I think I can completely agree with what you said. But I can still feel a win when people reach out their hand to say hi and suddenly get embarrassed that I can't shake their hand. But the win is not to make them uncomfortable. The win is that they don't think about me being in a wheelchair every second. When they forget that, we can continue to talk and move further. And for me, the journey, as you described it, for me, I started to call it my inner integration. When I integrate my disability into my personality, when I accept my disability, I can enjoy the abilities that comes with it. And inner integration for me is another word for self-esteem, maybe. That this is me. I mean, I have a Jewish background. I'm Jewish. I'm in a wheelchair. I'm an immigrant. There are so many things with all of us. And when you're secure in that, you can actually achieve more.
David, you and I could do a separate podcast about stories involving people trying to shake our hands and typing with my foot here. I've got my laptop in front of me now. I mean, just before I come to Carla, though, just on some of those practicalities, because I'm assuming your job involves lots of note-taking and meetings and all of these things. So are you using your feet in those situations, and how do people react to that? Are you using kind of voice technology? What are you doing day to day?
Usually typing with a iPad brush
with your mouth
on the screen. It's quicker with my mouth because it would take too long to get off.
Yes, okay.
For me to get help to remove the socks and shoes every time.
Yes,
I would be faster with my feet, but it would take too much of a nuisance to come there. So
understood. Yeah,
I use my feet at home and otherwise my mouth.
But straight away, that's a very visible. When you're sat in the European Parliament doing that. Nobody else in that room is doing that. So that straight away sets you out for good or bad. That's people will go, oh, that's David, or I want to go and find out more about that guy.
I have an old drumstick from a PlayStation game called Guitar Hero, I think, that I put in my mouth and I raise my hand with holding an old bitten drumstick in my mouth.
Fantastic.
I always carry that with me and push the buttons like to speak on the microphone and doing everything like that.
But this is exactly the kind of thing, isn't it? That actually we need to see more of these kinds of things in parliaments around the world, so that it's all just, I don't really like the phrase normalized, but it's all just, people just accept that you're there doing your job just like everybody else. Carla, what about yourself with your vision impairment? How has that affected your day-to-day work?
So like David, I mean, I was born this way. I have about 10% corrected vision with my glasses on and about 5% without. So not a lot. I can't see very well. And politics is a visual game. I can't read name tags. I can't recognize faces. I can't read a font of a certain size. The entire way our parliament is structured is based on the Speaker of the House giving visual clues. Now you can stand up. I'm going to nod and now you sit down. The way we vote, you have to see that the vote's coming down. You're like everything, in cabinet, around the cabinet table, material is often table dropped. So you just get it on the spot, and it's often in a font that isn't, that I can't read. And it has been an educational process, I would say, for the entire government. And, it's taken longer in some cases, and they've caught on to it in other cases very quickly. And it has resulted in the kinds of changes you were talking about earlier around just being a parent with a stroller, that makes it better for everyone. So, in cabinet, we used to be given these binders, and cabinet ministers would walk around the halls of parliament with 2 or 3 or 4 binders for a meeting. And of course, in a 40 font, I would have 8 or 10 binders. And it just became unmanageable. So they started giving me stuff on a secure tablet, so I could just use my own adaptive equipment and use the software enlarging program. And then cabinet colleagues looked around and said, why are we carrying 7 binders? And she gets this tiny little tablet, which actually has resulted in cabinet in Canada going to e-cabinet, meaning everything is electronic for everybody now. And now what I do looks like what everybody else does, but they only did it because I needed it to be done.
Fantastic.
And, there are moments of hilarity. And I think David's probably had a few of these of his own where I just stand up in Parliament and I get going and I'm talking and I'm not paying attention. And of course, I'm not aware whether the speaker is standing up, which is super disrespectful. And I've had colleagues yank me down basically to get me to stop talking because the speaker has to. But I mean, it's understanding it's a process, but it's really being okay with being a bit of a pain in the ass, being a bit of a thorn in their side, right? Respectfully, but they can figure it out. I mean, none of this is rocket science if you just think about inclusion and be respectful and ask, right? I'm sure the biggest thing, for both of you has often been people not having the confidence to say, okay, how can I help? Or what do you need? Or what, does this work for you? No, so let's change it.
What you're both speaking about here is exactly what WeThe15 is all about, isn't it? Inclusion. It's about disabled people doing just ordinary, everyday things, both in their personal lives, their professional lives, in all sorts of careers, and just getting on with it and just having, it's like you, David, you need the stick to type with, you need something to say, you want to ask a question. And Carla, you're saving the world by getting all the Canadian MPs to give up their binders full of paper and moving to electronic tablets. This is it, isn't it? This is inclusion. This is We the15 or WeThe23 as we agreed that we'd have to call it in Canada. But when we think about societal change, I mean, we've obviously done episodes about sport and about television and media, advertising. But it strikes me actually that some of the people we see most often on our TV screens are politicians. So if we as the world, as society in the world, start to see more disabled politicians, that will be a great driver for change right across society, won't it?
Absolutely. And unapologetically, I'm very light sensitive, for example. So if I'm going to do an event outdoors, an announcement, an event with the Prime Minister, I'm wearing sunglasses. And, all politicians are told, don't wear sunglasses in your announcements. It looks like you're hiding something. It looks like you don't want to make eye contact. Like, I can't make eye contact, so that's not happening anyway. But it's taken kind of the system a long time to not consistently have staffers running up and saying, Minister, you have to take off your glasses. Minister, you have to take off your glasses. Minister, they just are super uncomfortable with me being me in that space because of what viewers might read into the fact. Now, Canadians now know that if you want Carla outdoors, she wears sunglasses. And so, maybe that's just it. But it's these constant, it's my teams constantly having to think of when I go to an event to count the number of stairs to get up to the stage, to check the lighting so it's not too dark, to check the height of too bright, check the height of the podium, because depending on how low the podium is, that will dictate the size of the font for my speech. So there's all these things that other people are just thinking about what they're going to say. And I'm worried about if I can read my speech, right? So it is, but I've got an excellent team, but it's taken time.
My staff does the same checks about everything, except for maybe the lighting, but otherwise everything.
Yeah.
But also I think that, look at how people viewed the Paralympics in the 80s compared to now. It's a journey. And I think that we are two of those who are front runners right now, but hopefully there will be a lot more coming after us as well.
But I think it also needs to be said that we are the exception. Right? Like in the kind of general population of people with disabilities, one of the things I'm very sensitive to, and one of the things I get accused of is, well, that's not the everyday experience. That's not the lived experience of the average person with a disability in Canada. We don't all have fancy jobs. We didn't all make the podium. We did there's actually a very derogatory term for us that I will not use, but in Canada that almost makes it harder to be legitimized within the community itself, because there's a feeling that sometimes you can't relate to the actual day-to-day experience of barriers. And you went to law school, you had all these opportunities. Absolutely. And I'm very sensitive to that. I know that we are still the exception. All of us sitting here are kind of privileged with access and voices that the vast majority of people with disabilities on this planet don't have. And we have to carry that heavily, I'd say.
I suppose that was the idea behind my question earlier about, would it have been more difficult for you to get into your positions were you not Paralympians? Because some people might, unfairly of course, but they might sort of disregard all of the rest of your careers and go, well, the only reason they're politicians is because they used to be a famous athlete. And
well, unlike David, I wasn't very famous. I'm not going to say, Canadians didn't know me very well when I first ran for politics. So we do have some famous Paralympians in Canada. I wasn't kind of up there. I was more behind the scenes of the sport system. But your point is absolutely valid. And I actually see it with my Olympic counterparts who are politicians who find it hard to get out of that mold. Yeah. I'd say more than us who don't have the luxury of that recognition and stature and in society. But it's really hard when you're pigeonholed, when you're put into a certain frame to get out of that.
But also, to be fair, we didn't just happen to become Paralympians. We worked extremely hard.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Yes.
And since I'm not running again for my next mandate, it's easy to say. We worked really hard for it, and many Paralympians did also. So, it's also a matter of trying to always achieve your best.
And despite the system, like the system didn't just hand this to us. We succeeded despite the system.
And I think it's extremely hard work, both being a politician with a disability and Paralympian. It's no 8-hour days, 8-hour shifts. It's much more than that.
And just, we're coming towards the end, but just one more question, I think, going back to the representation. Would you be in favour, either of you, of what we tend to call positive discrimination or quotas, as in, for example, if you have X number of candidates trying to become a politician in a certain area, that a certain percentage of them, or let's say one of them, has to have a disability, that kind of thing? Would you be in favour of that or not?
Me, no. Absolutely not.
Because? Because
I would never get the respect of my colleagues if I didn't fight for the position just as like they did.
Carla?
Yeah, I'm again a little more nuanced. I would say that I'm in favor of targets, but not absolute quotas. So I would say that we need to strive to achieve to have a parliament in Canada that looks like Canada. We have to recognize that, simple quotas actually don't address the underlying systemic barriers. If I couldn't get into a school and I couldn't get an education, and there's all these other things that are underneath a quota that I think a quota sometimes permits people not to address. So an absolute quota without the systemic work underneath it. So I've evolved my thinking in this. I used to be absolutely against. In the US, it would be affirmative action. But in Canada, we moved towards kind of a more of an equity approach, but it's getting at those underlying barriers. So I think targets are probably where I would stay on that. We got to have political parties, for example, in Canada to have, just like we say, we would like 50% of candidates to be women because 50% of Canadians are women. I would like political parties to set targets. We would like 10%, 20%, whatever that is, so that there's a goal, there's a achievable that we can measure against. But without the underlying system work that we're not doing, I think quotas are dangerous.
I can agree with targets as well. I just answered the question of quotas. but that I can agree with. But also, you were selected to become the minister because you were the best candidate. And I don't want to remove that.
I agree. Thank you.
We can all agree on targets then. And you've made me, I don't know, you've given me the impulse to sort of quit my sports reporter job and try and immediately get into politics, because it's something I've thought about for a while, and you two have inspired me today.
You should do it.
You should do it. Absolutely.
It's heartbreaking and awesome at the same time.
I want to be a sports reporter, so that's great.
Me too.
I'm not sure I've got all of the qualities necessary, but you two have definitely inspired me. So, and it's been a real pleasure speaking to both of you. It's been really enjoyable and really interesting. So thank you very much, both of you, for your time.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you both.
Well, Carla, David and myself put the world to rights there, I think. Next week's episode of the WeThe15 podcast is all about business and employment. I'll be joined by Yulia Bruchescu, Global Accessibility Advisor at the French pharmaceutical giant Sanofi, and Alina Alam, who has founded a chain of cafes across India called Miti Cafe, which are run by hundreds of adults with a range of disabilities.